Welcome to All Saints Catholic School e-learning. This is our Working It Out video for English, and we're going to be looking at the significance of crime in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For this session, you will need to have watched the Big Idea video on this topic first. You'll need to be seated somewhere which is quiet so you can focus, and you'll need a pen and paper. By the end of this video, you will have recalled key facts about crime in Victorian England, considered how this context is relevant to the novella, analysed relevant quotes. So I'd like us to recall what we learned in the previous video. On your piece of paper, please do a brain dump, listing down everything you can remember. Feel free to pause the video for a few minutes while you do this. And if you're struggling, do look at this whiteboard for examples. Great work. Let's go through a brief recap. So first of all, crime statistics showed that crime was declining. However, we know that there were issues with these statistics. Sometimes police misreported, and some parts of the community didn't feel comfortable reporting crimes to the police, especially the working class. There was a distrust and a lack of faith. Common crimes that we're aware of were pickpocketing, violence, and prostitution. There were some high-profile media cases during the Victorian era, and there was a rise in sensationalist journalism. People really were gripped by these stories in the news. Finally, there was a real belief that the way someone looked was linked to their character, and people felt that looking at faces and studying the faces of criminals would help us predict who would be criminals in the future. And so mugshots were analysed, and this is called physiognomy. So how does this link to Jekyll and Hyde? Well, firstly, there is a lot of senseless, violent crime in the novella. Hyde trampled calmly over the child's body, and this progresses later in the novella when he kills Sir Danvers Carew, clubbing him to the earth. At the end, we could argue that Hyde's final victim is Jekyll, in fact, because he's overcome him, and he says, "I am the chief of sinners." Despite this violent crime, which reflects the time, the police actually play a small part. The first crime is settled outside of the police, with the criminal Hyde agreeing to settle the case with a £100 fine, which perhaps reflects the distrust of police in that era. Utterson really plays the role of chief investigator. He identifies the dead body and he links the murder weapon to Hyde. He literally leads the police to Hyde's door. Furthermore, people at the time believed in physiognomy, and Hyde's appearance reflects his criminality. The final point we could make is that Hyde and Jekyll's house is located in the working class area of Soho. This links the criminal and violent activity to the working class, reflecting the widely held belief at the time that criminality was a class issue. So we're going to do an activity now. We will explode two quotes which are related to this potential exam question. How does Stevenson present violent crime in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? When we explode these quotes, I'll be looking for you to zoom in and analyse keywords, because this will really get you marks in the exam. To link this to the effect it has on the reader, and to bring in historical context. So over to you. I'd like you to copy the two quotes down that are in the box, and then work your way through the tasks which are numbered. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to highlight the most powerful words in the quotes. Then I'd like you to think about what you associate with the phrase "clubbed him." How does this affect the reader? How does it make us feel about Hyde? And finally, how can you link in context to this quote? Can you even bring in physiognomy? So let's look at my answer, and please add to your own notes. I've highlighted the key words for me in these quotes. And now let's look at my responses to the questions. So what do I associate with the phrase "clubbed him"? Stevenson uses very violent imagery. Hyde clubbed him to death. The verb "clubbed" shows that this was an intentional act of violence, and that the antagonist repeatedly hit his victim until he died. How does this affect the reader? The progression of violent crime from earlier in the story makes the reader fearful of Hyde and worried about what will happen next as things are escalating. How does this link to context? Can we bring in physiognomy? The description of these violent acts would appeal to a Victorian readership who were also probably gripped by the rise in sensationalist reporting of crime at the time. In addition, Hyde's appearance would have reinforced the commonly held belief in physiognomy. People thought that you could predict a person's criminality simply from looking at their face. Stevenson reflects this belief by describing Hyde as giving an impression of deformity. His physical appearance suggests he is misshapen and is a physical representation of the darkness within him that leads him to commit crimes. Great work. You have recalled crime in the Victorian era, considered how this context links to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and just now you analysed some quotes. Thanks for your time and for your focus.